All right, welcome back to HashrateUp Focus. Today, I would like to cover a more energy-related topic, which is the topic of stranded energy. This is often referenced, very often not well understood what it actually means, and I just want to give some context so we can all talk about it better. HashrateUp, hardware sales, advisory, hosting, and site brokerage. Find new and used ASIC deals through the website and the Telegram channel below. Make smarter decisions with HashrateUp. Stranded energy refers to energy that is stranded, energy that is not used but potentially could be produced, right? So in any energy system, demand and supply always have to be in perfect balance to keep the frequency at 50 hertz. When energy is stranded, it means that theoretically more energy could be produced but isn't due to the lack of load. This is especially important in mini grids, which we will get to in a minute, right? So I'm going to try and cover a few examples of what stranded energy is. And then I would like to address why Bitcoin mining is the perfect customer to take care of that stranded energy, which is something that really the energy industry hasn't seen before. There was never a consumer or customer with the low profile that Bitcoin mining has, and therefore the problem of stranded power was never really resolved. So one first example would be Ethiopia, where we have a lot of hydropower in the grid mix, but not a lot of infrastructure to transport the energy from A to B, right? So infrastructure is always necessary. We need grids or roads or pipelines to transport the power and the electricity from the point of generation to the consumer, or in the case of gas, from the gas well to the consumer where it's then used, right? Otherwise, the electricity has no value and is stranded. In Ethiopia's context, a lot of substations have electricity available, but there's no capacity to transmit that power onwards to the consumer, which makes it stranded at the substation. This is why a lot of the time you will see Bitcoin miners co-locate with substations. They will buy their own transformers, locate on the ground of the substation, and then consume the power right then and there. Why they can do that, we will get to in a minute. Another example would be stranded solar, right? So imagine at 12 p.m. in Germany, all the solar is firing, and they're basically cannibalizing each other, right? But at the same time, there is no demand for electricity. So the regulator actually has to switch off the power plants from being able to transmit power to make sure that the grid does not get overloaded with too much power while there is not enough consumption. A third example, this time gas, would be a stranded gas well, right? Imagine a oil digging, oil pumping operation in the middle of nowhere in Texas or in the UAE, and now gas is always a byproduct of any oil well, and so that gas has to be burned or flared because we don't want to just vent it into the atmosphere. But why is it burned? Again, because transporting the gas from a point of production to the point of consumption is not economically feasible, and therefore it gets burned or flared off instead. This is energy that theoretically could be turned into electricity, but isn't because there's no financially viable option to do so. Right. So there's a difference between physically stranded energy and financially stranded energy. Basically, all physically stranded power is also economically stranded because it cannot be sold. Physically stranded means, again, there's no way to transport the power to a consumer, and thus the energy cannot be actually produced. Financially stranded, on the other hand, is a small subset of that, right? So imagine in South Africa, you have stranded solar, a lot of solar production at the same time of the day, 12 p.m., the height of the sun, right? But there's not enough consumption in the grid to make sure that all of that power gets actually transmitted and used by a consumer. Now, to incentivize solar build out, often governments will subsidize solar power plants and give them subsidies as if they were producing power, even though they are not, right? So let's say in a situation where I have a solar power plant and I am not able to transmit the power to the grid, but now instead the government gives me a subsidy, right? As if I was doing that to incentivize me to build the solar power in the first place. Now, if I said to the government, dear government, I will use the power on my grounds myself, and therefore my subsidies fall away, that means that the power is not really financially stranded, right? Because now I have opportunity cost. This is what it's all about, right? The opportunity cost of stranded power is zero, right? There is no option to sell the power, and therefore the power is virtually free to the operator, right? There is no market for it, there's no demand for it, so there's the value of the kilowatt hours is zero. Now, if my subsidies fall away, this is why this is important. If my subsidies fall away, my cost of the power is actually the level of the subsidy. And that's the basis from which we have to argue whether Bitcoin mining makes sense or not, right? If I'm being paid, I don't know, $4 per kilowatt hour, if I wasn't Bitcoin mining just as a subsidy, now my cost of that power is 4 cents. I think this is very important to understand, especially in the South African context, where there is a lot of this going on, and people don't really truly understand what it means that their power is physically and financially stranded. Right. So what you see in front of you is me trying to explain this in a very rudimentary way. Again, what does stranded mean? This is resembling the example of a company like Gridless, which is mining on hydro. The blue line shows you what the theoretical electricity supply is. This is water running down a mountain that's being partly funneled through a turbine to then spin and produce kilowatt hours that can then be consumed in the grid. On the bottom in the red curve, you will see the grid demand, right? So for different hours in the day, you will have different levels of demand in the local grid. And the BTC load in yellow, you cannot see here because it's not yet shown, right? But what you can see from this is theoretically a lot more power could be produced, everything above the red line, than we're currently doing. So everything between the red line and the blue line is actually physically stranded power. What does that look like in practice? It's basically water running past a turbine. Now, this is where Bitcoin mining can come in, right? Bitcoin mining can fill all of the gap between the grid demand, which pays more than Bitcoin mining in most cases, and what is available. So all the space can be filled. And we'll get to why Bitcoin mining can do that in a moment. But this is why it's special, right? Imagine again solar or the substation in Ethiopia. A lot more power is available than you have demand in the grid. And all of that space between the grid demand and the available supply could theoretically be filled by Bitcoin mining, improve the revenues of the grid operator or of the electricity producer, and more electricity is sold. This is the power of stranded energy, right? The power between the red and the blue curve is virtually free because there's no other user for it, there's no market for it, and there's no other off-taker other than Bitcoin miners, potentially. This episode is sponsored by HashBranch, the easiest way to mine Bitcoin in the US. Sourcing hardware and rack space usually is a mess. Bad deal structures, misaligned incentives, and no visibility after deployment. I have placed tens of thousands of ASICs in partnership with HashBranch. What I like most is that they cut through the noise. Fair pricing, aligned terms, and access to hosting that actually works. Use code HashrateUp100, visit hashbranch.com today to get $100 off of each miner that you order. Right. So why are Bitcoin miners actually able to use this stranded power and nobody else? And why do miners hunt for it, going all over the world, stranded gas wells, jungles in Kenya, on-grid in Ethiopia, right? Bitcoin miners look for this power because there's no competition for it. Therefore, it's very, very cheap. And as we know, a large portion of the operational expenditure for Bitcoin miners, roughly 60 to 70%, is power cost. So the lower the power cost, the better it gets. As we covered in the hash price video, Bitcoin miners cannot really much control the amount of revenue they make, and thus controlling the cost side of things is even more important. Bitcoin miners are the perfect customer for this kind of situation when it comes to stranded power. This is also why I said in the beginning that this is really a novel solution to an old problem, because Bitcoin mining has not been around for that long in the size that we see it today, where we are at 1 zettahash now. First point, Bitcoin miners are very quickly available. it's comparatively easy to put a container on the ground, connect it to a transformer, order the machines, plug them in, and start running, right? So there's not a lot of lead time when it comes to plugging in the machines. There's no infrastructure necessary. This is super important, right? I don't need to have a big grid pipeline to funnel kilowatt hours from A to B. I don't need a gas pipeline. I don't even need roads for a truck to ride on to transport energy from A to B. All I need is a non-physical, very important, non-physical internet connection with a low latency. That's kind of what I need to connect my electricity source to the Bitcoin network and therefore a revenue source. Bitcoin miners are also location agnostic because they don't need any infrastructure. Internet access is virtually available everywhere, and therefore Bitcoin miners are also not limited to locations where the internet is accessible to produce value from energy or electricity. Bitcoin miners are time agnostic, right? The Bitcoin blockchain produces blocks every 10 minutes, 365, 24 hours a day. And therefore, Bitcoin miners always have a customer available and they are time agnostic, therefore. They are also highly controllable, right? Ramping them up and down is very easy compared to other loads like AI loads or large steel mills or whatever other bigger consumer you can think of. Bitcoin miners react very quickly. Think back to the curve that I showed with the blue and the red curve, right? There it is important that we can shut off before the grid demand kicks in. And therefore, it's important that we're controllable and react very quickly. Last but not least, Bitcoin miners have a high power density. So it is comparatively easy to consume a large amount of power, e.g. 1 megawatt in a 20, 40-foot shipping container, compared to other loads that are out there. So these 7 qualities make Bitcoin mining the perfect customer to soak up all the stranded power that is available today, which makes this so revolutionary. Very important here is, again, Bitcoin miners looking for the stranded power because the opportunity cost for the producer is 0. There is no other revenue source, and therefore Bitcoin miners can come in and bid a very low amount for the energy. Last but not least, I think this is where it gets a bit philosophical. I wanted to note the following, right? So over the last 15, 20, 30 years, we've seen a tremendous growth in renewable energies and flexible loads that are not controllable, unlike other power plants. And at the same time, over the last 15 years, we have seen a growth in Bitcoin mining, which is actually the perfect solution to this ever-growing, unflexible generation source of power, which has its limit when it comes to how much you can financially incentivize it, right? This is why I'm so bullish when it comes to power generation and Bitcoin mining in Africa, because here we don't have, in most cases, a currency that's strong enough to subsidize build out and incentivize investment that way. So Bitcoin mining becomes a more important revenue source for all of these electricity generators and developers to make sure that they can sell all the kilowatt hours that they are capable to produce. Right. With that being said, I hope this explains the concept of what stranded energy is a bit more. If you have questions, please leave them below. If you like this format, hit subscribe and leave a comment. I will be doing more of this in the future, and I'm sure I will have created more questions with some than I have been able to clear up. So let me know what you thought, and I'll see you next time.